So my name is Lishan Huang, Design Education Manager here at AIGA and host of Design Future Live. And in this joint event from AIGA and Phaidon, we'll be talking about this book, Nike, Better is Temporary. So without further ado, I will introduce our two guests today, and then we'll kick it off with the conversation with them. So our first guest you see here is Sam Grawe, who's the author of the book. He's also a creative director and brand consultant based in the San Francisco Bay Area. He was previously the global brand director for Herman Miller. And before that, he served as editor-in-chief of Dwell magazine. And we're also honored to have today Demetria White, formerly the Senior Director of Global Communications, Culture, and Creative Accelerator at Nike, and very recently became their VP of Global Communications and Purpose at the Jordan brand. So welcome again, Sam and Demetria.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
And congratulations, Demetria, on your new position within the company. So let's talk about the origin story, because this is thick book full of history and some amazing stories. Sam, you interviewed 67, you said, different executives, leaders at Nike about the book. So can you tell us a little bit about the origins of how this happened?
Yeah, I'll go back a little further. I think kind of joined the project a little bit midstream. I remember I wrote a book with Phaidon previous to this, or worked on a book with some colleagues at Herman Miller, A Way of Living. And in that process was working with the design editor at Phaidon, Amelia Tirani. It's a great friend. And I remember when we were working on that book, when she first flew out to Nike, presumably to meet with Demetria, who I didn't know at the time. And she was so excited about it. I remember her talking about some of the stuff that she was working on with them through the years. And then, and so this project really goes back probably 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. And then I joined in sort of, I believe it was the summer of 2019, although all of our senses of time are warped at this point, and really delved in for like a good year to kind of help to bring it to completion. Sort of there's a period in bookmaking where the rubber hits the road and things get real. So that was like, I had the good fortune of joining at that point in time. But it really was a kind of long project of kind of figuring out what this could and should be that Demetria really initiated within the company. And, we can kind of talk to sort of the specifics of how the book came about, but it was really Demetria's baby.
Well, yes. And that and an amazing creative team that helped us put it together. So, I think, the book kind of came about from, just thinking about how we can use communication strategies differently and reach an external audience. And once the team started to initiate an innovation project called Breaking 2, in which case, it was an attempt to break the sub 2-hour marathon. We invited Amelia, actually, from Phaidon to come join us for that trip. And it was on that trip and being on the track before the race or the attempt was about to happen at around 5 a.m, that it just felt like in that second that we're in an inflection point, maybe for the company, maybe for, the world in terms of this attempt that we're trying to make. And it was in that moment that, I sort of thought, this could be a perfect time for us to just reflect on our design philosophy, reflect on who we are as a company and who we are as a team over at Nike, especially knowing that with the digital age and digital information, everything is so fast and fleeting. It doesn't offer you an opportunity to sort of reflect on that. And so the idea and, the genesis of the book project came, together with Amelia as we're watching Elliot try to break this attempt or make this attempt. And, not making it, but actually saying in that moment that for him, this was the start of a new journey, that, we should actually sort of document this. And so our objective for this book really was for us to just kind of look back at our internal design philosophy, create a bit of an internal, an intimate connection between ourselves and people on the outside to really see what the process is, to kind of get a look into how we tick, but also, to really help inspire the next generation of design talent that would want to try to pursue things that maybe seem out of reach, or pursue things that are a process that seems never ending, but actually the results actually come to solve other problems. And it's really also a method. In order to go into the future, you do have to look at the past in order to build toward that. And so we very much look at the book as that. And it was a long thing in the making, but even throughout the process and all the interviews that Sam kind of went through, there's a lot of learning, a lot of reviewing back, and a lot of tapping into just what makes us who we are as like a design and innovation company. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And for the folks who haven't looked at the book yet, there's so many futuristic looking things. We have a few images that we'll be showing over the course of our conversation today, but also some amazing archival photographs and packaging and things like that that we'll see as well in old shoes. So just to clarify a little bit for folks, Demetria, you mentioned Breaking 2 as part of the catalyst for this book. And I've been showing these images here in the screen share. And this is Eliud Kipchoge here. Could you speak to a little bit about some of these processes where you collaborate with athletes and the research that goes into all of this and the collaboration for the design?
Yeah, I mean, for us and for our design and innovation teams, the process all starts with collaboration, and the ultimate collaborator for us is with an athlete. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to constantly look for, better solutions through design to help unlock the human potential for all of our athletes. So even if there's like a design change that we can make that can help improve an athlete's performance by a millisecond, that's what that's what the pursuit is. So we have innovation teams that are dedicated solely to doing copious research on our athletes. And for Breaking 2, what was interesting about that is that project sort of brought the best of everything at the Nike company together all in one project. So you have an audacious attempt or an audacious goal that most people wouldn't, put out there publicly that we're trying to do. We, sort of canvass the best athletes in the world to try to achieve this. And we put together a group of, engineers, PhDs, different scientists to kind of come together and really look at, human physiology and what actually happens in the body when you're trying to when you're trying to achieve something through these different conditions. And that is years of research that we also distill down to the everyday person. And so, what's interesting about us in the space is that is kind of inspired by the title of the book, Better is Temporary. Like, we never feel like we've achieved the goal. There's always more to improve on something. And so we're relentless in that pursuit. And even after Breaking 2, we're continuing to try to improve on all the insights that we received from that project that actually helped inspire another direction for our running performance product to go into. And we're constantly trying to innovate on that as well. So for us, we're constantly in pursuit of that.
We have this great quote here from Janet Nickel, who is one of the designers at Nike. As a designer, my arm is an extension of an athlete's dreams and aspirations. And I thought that was such a beautiful way of talking about this collaboration between the athletes and the designers to make something concrete and physical.
Yes, and Janet Nickel is the head of our of apparel innovation. She actually was instrumental in creating a lot of innovations in early basketball for the uniforms that we see today. She also recently worked on innovations that we will see in Tokyo on our track and field athletes. Should that happen? I think it will.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, exactly. We're crossing fingers over here. But what's interesting about that is it's exactly how the process of this book started, with Amelia and Sam coming out to our WHQ, to our campus. No design process or no project really begins until we feel like we understand or we know our collaborator or the creative that we're working with personally. And so the same goes for our design teams and our athletes. Just hearing, what shows they're into, like how they like to spend their day, like what they're emotionally connected to, helps and inspires our designers to go lean into a direction. And a lot of that is, what are things that are distractions that can get out of your way? Like, what is your favorite color? Like, all of those things factor in. And so I think what Janet is saying there is that when she's sort of thinking about design, she's thinking about every aspect of that element and of that athlete and all the aspirations they have that she wants to pour into the design. Because ultimately, if you feel like you look good, you perform well, and it does factor into an athlete's performance.
I think there's also something interesting where, like, athletes have a mentality that's about kind of always pushing. And, the Breaking 2 effort is representative of that. And, Iliad, when we were working, he didn't succeed at the first attempt, but he did in another not Nike event while we were in the midst of all of our 67 interviews. He did break the 2-hour marathon, And so, it's sort of like there is this constant pushing, and the title for the book, Better is Temporary, was sort of extrapolated from a quote from Nike's chief design officer, John Hoke. But it's like the athletes push themselves, and it also pushes Nike. And this sort of like, there's this relentless drive for innovation to kind of keep up with that and to keep going. And I think it was like the Breaking Two thing was really interesting because it was all of these sort of micro innovations from, down to the sock, like a sock that has 5 different zones, like for grip on the bottom and breathability on the top, to the sleeve that goes on the arm, to like micro dots on the shirt that cut down on wind resistance. And, there were just all of these things added up so that you could shave 3 minutes off that time. But it's sort of like the combination of these things. And that was a big unlock for Nike. But also in a way, the Breaking Two helped us to focus the content of the book, because it was like all of the things that you'd see in the rest of the book in one kind of distilled event that just set up the content.
So Sam, you were telling us before in the prep call about one of your first visits to the Nike campus and just kind of immersing in all of the amazing design and innovation stuff going on. So I wanted to pull up an image of this.
It's like,
this is around the ISPA, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I had met with Demetria in New York, and then my first trip it was actually my second time to Beaverton, but when I'd been there before, it was just to the archive, and that's kind of outside the main campus. And, I think the phrase is behind the berm. Is that right, Demetria? Yeah. So there's this kind of like, there's this berm, like the Nike campus is kind of surrounded by this great trail, and you don't really see what's going on. It's a little bit like, Willy Wonka, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but nobody knows what's really going on in there. And so like I had fairly, I think, unprecedented access to seeing kind of like what's going on in the NSRL, the sports laboratory, inside the space kitchen, inside some of these spaces that are like fantastically messy, actually. And, so unlike the perfect shoe that you see in, Nike's amazing stores or whatever. And I think, my first meeting in Beaverton was with this team that is called the ISPA team. They might have a different name in sportswear. They're part of the sportswear group, but it's this really interesting team. They work a lot with outside collaborators. Some of the names you might know from fashion, like Virgil Abloh or Martine Rose or Sakai. They're the team that's responsible for those collaborations. And somewhere in the middle of those outside collaborations, they kind of had this notion of like, well, what if we just collaborate with ourselves and borrow from around Nike's campus? If you go back one slide, this is even their logo, they have this whole thing about sort of scavenging. So for their logo, they've scavenged bits of various other logos to create the ISPA logo. ISPA is also this idea. It's like a team of people who come out of schools like Central St. Martin and Eindhoven. They were kind of designing for the urban athlete. So like, who's to say that if you like get on a tube train at 5 a.m. and then you're working all day and then you're going out at night, like that's their kind of like thinking about an athletic or thinking about performance. And they also just kind of have this very future forward kind of approach and borrowing from all over the innovations in various bits of the company and almost like remixing those into something quite unique. But I've come from a background in design and architecture, and it was sort of like thrown into the deep end with these guys. If you go to the next image, I think this is one of their outputs from, I think it came out in the summer of 2020. It's called the Road Warrior? But it's like this amazing sort of totally unexpected shoe. And like, I remember this was my first interview was with a handful of the designers who were working on these products. And I didn't come into it from footwear and kind of had no idea what I was walking into. But it was really exciting to see something so unexpected kind of within Nike. And I think also just the indicative of like sort of the diversity of what they're looking at currently. It's not just basketball, it's not just football and traditional sport. There's so much outside of that that's sort of within the purview now. And so it was cool to see how they were thinking about problems differently. And even though this kind of like feels like fashion. There's so much kind of athletic problem solving underneath the hood too. And so I think we just like, also it was the opportunity to kind of get at all these varying aspects of the company that might not be as well kind of understood or known outside of what you traditionally think of.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, I mean, that's another motivation for this project, was really to reveal our innovation process, which, you know, Sam says it's a messy process. You think it's like shiny and perfect because of the way everything shows up, you know, within our retail environment, but it really is a culture of collaboration internally as much as it is externally when we create projects. And we literally have designers that are stealing from each other. Like they'll see something from the football team and they're like, let me borrow that from that desk and see if I can apply it here. Or can this thing that I saw over in the socks area kind of apply here? And when you do that, when you have a culture that allows for that, you actually create new design solutions you just didn't anticipate. And can adapt and can benefit. And so what's interesting about this Road Warrior is that those like little AirPods that you see were a direct reflection of the research and the insights and what the team learned from Breaking 2. That, you know, the ISPA team kind of like stole from the performance running teams and like, let's just take this and see what we can do in terms of like shock absorption and creating that kind of cushioning that an everyday athlete will need for their commute. And that's where you have this. And so for us, the happy accidents actually create new opportunities for us to extend the life of the innovations that we create from other projects.
Yeah, I love what you were saying there about the happy accidents and the borrowing or stealing even from different parts of the company to create something like this, which looks so sci-fi in a cool way. And I think there's one more ISPA image for folks who want to check this stuff out. All right.
I love how the threads look like, actually, like it reminds me of like a medieval city or something.
It really does. It's like something kind of like urban planning, architectural about it.
Yeah.
So speaking of structure, there's 5 thematic chapters in the book. Performance, which is about the athletes; brand expression, which is about Nike's story; collaboration; inclusive design; and sustainability. So could you tell us about how you got to these 5 and the choices you made to organize the book in this way?
It was kind of I think, you know, as much as you see sort of the combination of things horizontally or going across those things, it was just thinking about like how to organize the varying aspects. Like it's almost like what rose to the top in terms of organization of the varying aspects of where Nike's design is headed. And it wasn't as neatly arranged as like how the company might break down, but it was that these are the sort of avenues that are where the company is prodding and always pushing and looking at things. And it also just seemed to be sort of logical in that like everything comes from listening to the voice of the athlete. And so to start with performance, going back to Bowerman, it was all about sort of like tinkering and experimentation, and innovation came out of the research and out of like pushing to try to create something better that would serve the athlete. So it was natural to start there. Then brand, obviously, like Nike is known so much for its sort of like fantastic communications, but also that like brand is evident in the product itself. I think that like we used Air Max as the framing, the original Air Max as a framing of like how storytelling and can come across in the product itself. That was the first shoe to expose the airbag that had been within soles for almost a decade prior to that, but nobody kind of knew about. So it was like really the light bulb went off for Tinker Hatfield, the designer, and Mark Parker, who is sort of the design engineer, to really make that apparent. And in a way that, you know, Air Max is still, it's a huge part of the company still, and has really helped to transform the company. I certainly remember like the commercial with the Beatles, Revolution, and seeing that foot strike. It's like forever imprinted in my mind. So like, I think, you know, brand, obviously Nike's there. Collaboration is just a huge part, and it was not only to speak about the collaboration with outside designers, but also collaboration, as Demetria was pointing out, is so important to the culture of design at Nike, and that borrowing and that kind of looking across the organization and thinking about how different innovations can come from different places is critical. And like literally every shoe has the work of hundreds of people in it, or every design, I should say. It's far more than shoes. So, from the material scientists and researchers who are like far, far on the back end to, the color design teams that are working across business units to develop Nike's kind of approach to color. So collaboration was hugely important. One of this, I think, was originally going to be included in performance, but it just started to speak out. In the course of those interviews, I kept hearing this phrase, opening the aperture. We're opening the aperture, opening the aperture. And it was just this like great way of like Nike's focus had been here, kind of looking at athletes like this, but now like the permission is to look like this. And so this, the chapter is kind of about inclusivity and looking at different problem solving. It just seemed to be a huge part of like what was driving Nike's business in new directions now, and also of like problem solving for traditionally sort of underserved audiences. And that those kind of like micro targeting in a world where like Nike is so huge, to almost like refocus on a micro target. There's a project that I'd love for Demetria to talk about because she knows a lot about it, called the Victory Swim Collection. But essentially it's like a modest swimmer collection. These people have never been served with a product that is like for them and designed for the performance of like swimming, of like providing a good experience of swimming. And I think that like it's the innovations that are in this product eventually trickle down to so many other areas, but it's a great way that Nike is thinking about problem solving. So to dedicate a whole chapter to this kind of stuff was really important, I felt. Demetria, it'd be great if you could speak to this a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for us, like giving more people access to sport is like as critical to us as it is to creating, innovations that can help improve human life. And so thinking about where the gaps are and how we can fill it, or like how we can be part of the solution. And with this project that we called the Victory Swim Project, it was really kind of born from, a design team doing research and just getting insights into, like taking a break actually and looking at the beach and just saying like, noticing who's swimming and who's not, and who's having ease with swimming and who's not. And that's where this project is kind of born. Like we can use this as a design challenge to try to, create a solution in this situation where we can, help improve the performance and the function to get more women, or have more women have the ability to swim with a product that actually is solving for other problems. So there's copious amounts of research, a lot of insight from wear testers and people from the community, to come up with these design solutions that are amazing. It's like there's like different cuffs that are there with the arms and the ankles, so that you don't have like water trapping. The feeling of how you glide through the water with the material that the team used. I think someone kind of described it as like feeling like a shark in the water, because they just felt like they were like so smooth. And even thinking about the biggest challenge actually for the team was the hair management solution, because in order to have ease of movement, you do have to have a situation where your hair is controlled, and it also creates a bit of safety. And so by extending the imagination and actually the vehicle through which you can solve problems, we're actually able to take innovations and insights that the team put into this project into other projects as well. And so even if it's an innovation that's made for women from this community, it actually benefits everyone, because the insights can end up in men's apparel, and actually some of them are, and women's as well. So that's for us a good design challenge, is to actually look at broader communities and how we can extend their access to sport.
What a beautiful story. I feel like something like the hair management system, as you were talking about, right, could apply to so many other kinds of things, and it folds back into performance too. So it's not just like some niche minority community, but it kind of cross-pollinates, sort of like in the ISPA way, how these innovations that were meant for one purpose could be reused in other contexts and create benefits there.
And actually, another thing about that is that we had two different suits so that our consumer can decide. So there's one where it's sold in component parts, and one that is the full suit. And what we actually found is we were able to solve another problem we didn't even think about, which is sun protection. Some people have sensitivities to sun. Some people want to protect their skin from sun, and so you have the option to also purchase that suit as a tunic top and a bottom. And it also has SPF in it, so there is some sun protection. So we actually also were able to address another problem we didn't anticipate by making that.
That's wonderful. I'm just going to do a quick reset for folks who might be tuning into the stream and just joining us. I'm speaking here with Sam Grawe, who's the author of this book, Nike Better is Temporary, published by Phaidon. And we also have Demetria White with us here as well, who's the VP of Global Communications and Purpose for the Jordan brand. And we've been talking about the book, but also Nike broadly in terms of the history of the company and the legacy of the company in terms of innovation and design. We were going to do Q&A towards the end, but I think this is a good follow-up question around some of this collaboration stuff. Kristen wanted to know about how user testing happens and how you measure success. So something like the Victory Swim, Demetria, you were mentioning, like working with the women in this population directly. Could you give us some more insights about how that sort of testing works?
Yeah, so from footwear to apparel, we have a lot of resources for wear testing, depending on what the project is or what the product is meant to do. Let's say if it's like an ISPA shoe, for instance, and it's meant to be adaptable to an urban environment, we will look for wear testers that are in urban environments to test that so that we make sure that it stands up durability and the innovation is performing the way it needs to do, just as it would on grass in Beaverton. And so depending on the project, we do source individuals that help us in that area. We do source individuals that are from the community. So it's not like we don't have a group of professional, let's say, testers. We actually are eliciting individuals that will give us, honest feedback so that we can make the adjustments. In terms of measures of success, I think what our team does is they set really ambitious goals. And rather than, let's say, when they come to a problem, rather than working around it or dropping it, they continue to work on it until they solve that problem. So I guess a measure of success would be being able to have something function the way that you imagined it. And that's the thing, in the process, there are ways that, you start to create an innovation and then you hit a wall and it's not working. Our teams will put that to the side and just, sort of think about it. And then there's an aha moment and they pick it back up and kind of, morph it into something that that maybe becomes something different. But I think the largest measure of success for our design teams is the emotion that we get from people that are interacting with our product. I think having the first person wear that Victory swimsuit and say how they felt, like, brought tears to everyone's eyes, even like the design team, to know that. So I think we're also driven by, human passion and human emotion as a reaction to the innovations that we bring out there for, our consumers and people that follow our brand.
That's really touching. And I think it says something about how design is really core to the DNA of Nike. You were also telling me some stories about longtime CEO Mark Parker, who comes from a design background. Can you tell us about how Mark Parker really brought that ethos and kind of baked it into everything in the company?
Yeah, no, he's a unique leader in the sense that, he's a CEO that also has a design background. He actually was instrumental working together with Tinker Hatfield to bring to life innovations that we wear today, like Air Max, that whole family, and a lot of different
Pegasus.
Yeah, the Pegasus as well, that kicked off our running, but just running in general. And I think what's core to Mark's philosophy is this idea of collaboration, is that two partners can go to a place that they couldn't have imagined on their own, how important that is, and to foster a culture that does that. Also pushing the limits and always listening to the voice of the athlete and pushing the limits of innovation to reach human potential is also very critical to him as well. And then also another thing is nature, like looking at nature. So looking at nature and craft in order to push an innovation forward or get inspiration there. And culture is very critical. So looking at global culture, global subcultures, like how, youth is interacting with the world, how they're experiencing that, and his personal connection to art. He's an avid collector of art and objects and finds inspiration in those places. And so tapping into that community, the artist community, is something that's also very critical to his philosophy, which you see has come up in the way that, Nike shows up externally in terms of, how we bring something to life in a physical form for our consumers to experience, and or even the collaborations that we do with different partners. And I think a good example that's also in the book that is a project that, that Mark was very passionate about, is this shoe that we call the Nike oh no, I'm going to do it now. The Zvedochka, sorry. It was done with Mark Newson. And what that was about was really about trying to figure out a design solution for footwear that actually was made of different component parts that came together. So that was a very critical innovation sort of aha moment that Mark was pushing forward together at Mark Newson, which was all about modular design. And that actually collaboration that Mark led kind of trickled down maybe 4 years later into a boot that we call the Nike Arctos boot that, was a winter boot that had a bootie on the inside, so that, when you came in from the snow, you could leave your boots at the door and you slip out, and then you have these like natural slippers there. So Mark actually inspired a lot of different innovations, and he also was a key presence on the innovation floor. He would just show up and start taking things off your desk, asking like, what is that doing? What is that? And asking, questioning the weight of things. So he's very critical in creating and fostering that culture that we still hold on to today.
I think too, like just to add something, like he has this, I think brought a designer's mindset to this leadership role. And he had this great way of summarizing how he thought about innovation and design at Nike. And he compared it to like hunter-gatherer societies and farming societies. Cause like, and if you look at like the diversity of what Nike does, you can kind of make this out. Like if you look at something like the Road Warrior, it's like hunting. It's like improvisational. You have to like kind of go against the currents. There's a high rate of failure. That elephant might get away or trample you or whatever, right? But then like you also have this like great reward if you succeed, versus the kind of farming thing where like a Pegasus shoe that's just like every year you're planting the seed, you get a little bit better. It's just this sort of like natural progression. And so even that, just of like being able to kind of extrapolate and synthesize and look at the company that way, I think was very unique. And if you look at some of the like development that's happened even within the Nike campus over the last couple of years, it's just grown tremendously. But it's almost like his vision of how important innovation and research is to developing the product at the same time as like growing other parts of the business are reflected in that growth. And so I think just bringing a kind of design mentality to the overall business was really critical in having Nike kind of become what it is today.
I love that connection between the hunter-gatherer with the high tech and how that comes together. So we've been talking about the 5 thematic chapters of the book: performance, brand expression, collaboration, inclusive design. I think we've covered that well. And the 5th one is sustainability, which is a huge part and a commitment as well. Hannah Jones, who's the founder of the Nike Valiant Labs, has this great quote: "Sustainability is innovation," which I think is a great way to kind of bridge that rather than thinking about it as like separate or an external thing. Could you tell us more about what sustainability means at Nike and how that happens?
I might just leap in quickly before Demetria. It's just, I think it was really like important for us, I think, to end on that chapter because it's so much about where the future of where Nike is going. I think it's been a big commitment to look at a like more holistic view of like Nike design and products and their effect on the planet and on human well-being. Since the early 2000s, Hannah came from a nonprofit activist kind of background. And frankly, she was kind of like shunned in her own kind of community for joining Nike. But she had this thought that like, if I'm really going to affect change, this is where I need to be. Here's somewhere where I can use my platform to make the kind of change that would be significant. And Nike set some pretty audacious targets for waste and for taking, energy use out of their product. And also because Nike's so reliant on a supply chain, they've been instrumental in sharing that across that supply chain and with other manufacturers. And so there's just a huge push there to move towards a more kind of circular product. And even in our ending, there's some audacious things that John Hoke was talking about. Like, what if you can just put your shoe in the ground and it will help you grow the next thing? Or another innovation leader, Michael Donoghue, was saying something along the lines of like, what if we've already been allotted every molecule that we could use? How would we operate our business today if that was the constraint? And I think that they're really pushing towards that kind of thinking. For me, and that first visit to Nike, again, I got to have some insight into a product line that's now available, but wasn't then, that's called Space Hippie. And that was almost like a group saying, okay, we have all these like really far out ideas about sustainability that we're working towards, but what if we hit pause on that and did everything that we could do today and baked it all into one product that we could put out today? What would that look like? And essentially, one of the unlocks here was like this idea of like using waste material from all of the other shoe making, because essentially when you like there's a sustainability index, and there's a great app that anyone can download. I think it's called the Making app, and it's like Nike's sustainability index for materials made available. So you can look at different materials and see kind of how they rate, how like a leather rates to this, and make better decisions. It's something that was created along with some students. So I recommend people check that out if they want to see something sort of behind some of this. But the Space Hippie program was really cool because it was like this idea of like a little bit inspired by like The Martian, that movie, where like, okay, this is what we've got here in our lab. Like, what can we make out of all this junk, essentially? And so it was taking this leftover scraps from other products, some pre and post industrial waste, and like trying to shape it into a new kind of performance shoe. And so you get things like I don't know the exact name of the material on the sole, but like the foam is composed of other product that's been broken down and recomposed. The color of the material on the upper that's knit is because it's like when you take a bunch of shirts and you mix them together, you get a gray. And so this was just an exciting project where it's like, this is the sort of like most that if we pull out all the stops right now, here's sort of our vanguard of what a sustainable product could look like. But I know that there's a continued push to take this even further.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a couple more questions for me, and love to get in some audience questions as well. This wouldn't be an AIGA event without nerding out about the design of the book itself. So I just wanted to show some spreads here. And there's the spine, but for the cover, these are actually custom colors that were developed by Nike. Could you tell us more about the custom colors, but also some of the design considerations about the book itself? Because I thought this was really cool as it touched upon sustainability, but also that real customized brand design with the colors and all of that, and also the cross-pollination because it came from a different place too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think for us, color innovation is very critical. And that's also another thing that Mark is really passionate about is, using colors as an interesting way to innovate. But we worked with a duo, Maximage as the designers of the book, Julian and David. We partnered with them, or chose to partner with them because in their own practice, they innovate in color and printing practices, and they kind of work with proprietary colors as opposed to Pantone. In the same way, our color innovation journey is the same, where we work with proprietary colors, and we use, chemistry and science to come up with colors that will register with the eye in an interesting way. Because on one hand, we believe in visibility, but on another hand, it does affect our athletes' performance. Where color can be an intimidating thing when you're at the Olympics going, doing that 100-meter, and you walk out there and you can, and other people see you. It can give you a competitive advantage mentally. But for the book itself, with Maximage, we wanted to, because the book is representing our innovation journey, we wanted to represent two colors that were very critical in our color innovation story. So you have Volts, which was a color that we introduced in 2012 at the London Olympics globally, but we did do a small collection of uniforms for the Oregon Ducks football team there. Where it's all white and Volt. But what we found is that the way that Volt color registers to the eye, it does elicit an emotional connection. And so Volt was very critical for us to have a footprint in the London Olympics, because even though we weren't a sponsor, you felt like we were, because you could see that color everywhere on all of our athletes. The second color that's there on the cover is Hyper Punch, which was very critical for us as on a mercurial boot, which our color innovation team considered from the television. What would a football boot look like, knowing the exact color of the pitch that our athletes would be competing on for that specific World Cup? and how it could register across the TV, and also taking into account the pixelation of your TV screen and what that looks like. And so Hyperpunch was developed, which is really, if you look at a mercurial blue that has this original color, it does feel like it's a multi-dimensional color, even though it has these different variants in it. So yeah, so we knew Maximage would be the team that could really, bring those colors to life in with the material that they're working on, because color, it all depends on the materials that we're using for color to adhere. The other thing we wanted to do is, think about sustainability in mind, and how can we take a sustainable mindset to try to create a book that has the least amount of materials. And so really what we have is it's 2 pieces of cardboard fused by plastic, which yes, plastic is intensive for the environment. But with this, the intention is that the book will have longevity. Like, it won't break down quickly, and you'll keep it, because we also want this to be something that is passed down from generation to generation or borrowed from different people. And so it stands up for durability. So less glues, less materials. And we just thought also too, just like the Air Max, like let people see the spine of the contents and what's in it.
Yeah, I feel like that the plastic spine, hold it up, I think it really embodies that sense of transparency too, like opening the aperture, as Sam was saying before, into all of this history and design heritage at Nike.
Oh, and I forgot one other important part. The cover, you'll see there's a figure there. That's Eliud Kipchoge. So we have Eliud Kipchoge, an image of him from when he was making the attempt, embedded in that cover, since he was, the inspiration for us to kick off this project.
All right. So let's take some audience questions. Folks, if you have anything, feel free to type it into the Q&A pod. We've got a few minutes left here. And if you're watching the live stream, you can type there as well, and our staff can surface stuff for you. Ravi did have a follow-up question around the user testing. I think you started covering it, Demetria, earlier around Mark Parker and like just looking at what folks were doing in the design studios. But Ravi wanted to know about testing in the more infancy stages of the design process, like low fidelity prototyping or just things more at that concept level.
Yeah. Oh, so
can I just mention something really quick, not to interrupt, but like I think one of the things really interesting is like traditionally when Nike was designing back in the day, you had to like draw up a sample, like your design, and it would go to a maker halfway around the world, and you'd wait like 6 weeks to get something back, maybe. And now there's like facilities on campus that essentially are like representative, like in a microcosm of like what different facilities around the world are able to do at scale. But they've almost created this like little miniaturized like design factory within Nike's campus that enables the designers to literally like walk across campus and pick up the thing that they may have like been output on their computer like that morning. And so there's a much faster kind of turnaround in terms of being able to take those rapid prototypes and to be able to work directly with the making process and understand that making process to realize the design, which in a way is like a very Eamesian principle of like, if you don't know how it's made, you don't know how it will perform, or you can't innovate if you're not also involved in innovating at the process of the manufacture. And so it's been really critical to pull in those resources within the company to be able to operate at this kind of unprecedented speed, if you will. So like literally an athlete can be testing a product the day it's come out of the designer's imagination. And still there's all the sampling and all the things that go into making it a final realizable product at scale. But that rapid prototyping is such a huge part of what Nike's able to do now, and kind of like working within those processes. I think you had a slide of like what Flyprint, some of the process for like literally digitally printing an upper with a digital thread with nylon. And so like those kinds of things they can do on site very quickly, just to be able to mock something up that's very close to what the final product would be. And seeing that and getting to see how the designers are manipulating those processes and maybe even like doing them wrong is what ends up going like making a innovation like Flyknit, where like it was unanticipated, but now it's just become this sort of like staple of Nike's design vocabulary.
Yeah, Sam, you put it exactly right. And I think the only thing I would add to that is that, in the design process, we do pair our, let's say for footwear, for instance, we pair them with engineers. So you can also scenario test the functionality of something. So yeah, you are without that long kind of prototyping, sending it back kind of process. Because yes, we can do it all on site. And we also have facilities where you can test. So we have basketball courts, football pitches, full track, and we also have a lot of equipment that analyzes human physiology as well on site within our innovation kitchen.
The sensing and testing equipment at the NSRL is unprecedented.
So we have a question from Dan on LinkedIn. He wants to know, was there anything about the process that was positively surprising or exceeded your expectations, whether the design and production of the book itself or maybe even the research process?
Demi?
Oh, me take it? Anything that was surprising in the process? I think I've been with the company for about 13 years, and I feel like a lot of the projects that are in the book I've experienced, but there are a lot of backstories I just didn't know. And so revisiting those conversations with our design leads together with Sam and Amelia was really like, wow, okay, man. So that was something, and then also how people are connecting to the book. We as a company are really excited about that and happy about that as well.
I think it's like, I was going to say like walking out of an elevator and Michael Jordan standing there.
It's an athlete playground.
Just another day at Nike.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I had a moment where I was at the salad bar, like standing next to Kevin Durant. I'm like, oh, okay, we're both getting salad today. Cool. It's like
just things that happen at the Nike staff cafeteria.
Amazing. Yeah.
Sam, did you have besides running into Michael Jordan, were there any memorable interviews or favorite interviews you had?
I mean, there were so many. I think I didn't come into this at all with any kind of a sports kind of background, or sort of, footwear is so fetishized and there's a huge sneaker community, obviously, and I would not place myself within that at all necessarily prior to this. And so it was really exciting for me to kind of maybe look at Nike a little bit differently than it had been looked at before, more from the standpoint of it being really a design-led organization. Like behind all that footwear and sportswear is like this incredible approach to design. And so I think it was in a way felt very familiar because of my background at Herman Miller and kind of seeing what happens on the back end of design and working with designers to bring products to life. I know that it's messy. I know that it's good when it's messy, that experimentation. It was great to be able to see those kind of innovation spaces at Nike where it's just wild. There's stuff everywhere and people are, they got their hot glue guns and little scraps of things. And, it's just, it's kind of, as Demetria pointed out, there's just all kinds of ideas flying around the place all the time. And, one might be on its way out the door in a month, then others might take a few years. But I think it was just giving the readers a sense of all that goes into that, or at least a little window into that, and being able to tell that story that was exciting. But yeah, the interviews were all had tidbits that were great. I think, the ones that were maybe the most memorable are with the people that are sort of maybe farther upstream, in the innovation kitchen, as they call it. I remember a gentleman named Michael Donahue, just, it's he's been a Nike veteran, but he's almost preaching these sort of far out ideas and philosophy that you can see kind of leading into some of the products, but he's way out in space, but it'll eventually kind of land on the ground someday. So those are fun. John Hoke, to Nike's chief design officer, we had, there's an epilogue in the book that's kind of about where Nike's heading in the future. And we just had two great hour-long interviews that were super wide ranging, where, talking about supercomputers embedded in the, on the body, and making sport more accessible to all, and, being able to kind of change the future of sport and keep it accessible and help the planet, et cetera. Like there's no healthy sport and no healthy you if there's not a healthy planet. Mm-hmm. And so like those kind of more, I would say, getting to be exposed to some of the more visionary minds at Nike was super exciting.
So speaking of that, Lucas wanted to know about other emerging technologies at Nike. Are there examples of Nike using things like AR or VR in your work?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different types of innovations in that space that our team's using, or using computational design. I think if we can talk about a future innovation, because sometimes we share with the public innovations that aren't quite there yet because we're still experimenting. And I think right now in London, there's an experiment. And actually, Sam, you'll remember this. Remember Retina? Mm-hmm. So Retina was this color innovation that our team was working with that, it's not quite there yet. We're still trying to get it to it has some potential, but essentially what it is, it's a new way to apply color to material that's inspired by insects and the way light reflects off of butterflies and insects, which is really about fractal light, fractal color. And it actually was Mark Parker who, saw a butterfly kind of land at his feet, and he thought about the color. And he does, kind of obsess the color of beetles, and brought that into a technology that, happens to be something that we're working with. And so there's a AJ3 and an Air Force One that's on display there that just shows the potential, but it's not quite as sustainable as we want it to be. And we can't, and the durability is not there. So that's an example of a new technology we're using to improve on color.
I'd also add that Adapt is Nike's platform for embedding sort of smart technologies in footwear that respond and adapt to the user and personalize design. Right now, it's really kind of centered around a lacing system, but one can imagine a future where it's much more. I think there's a note in the book about when they realize that it's about lacing, it all creates this kind of squeeze. And so then there's this haptic response that happens where you can almost create a Morse code. So in the future, you might imagine that the product is helping instruct you through these sort of haptic responses. And those kinds of things are some of the stuff that, we'll start to see probably in the future, or maybe not, it might be a different avenue, but that was where the conversation was at the end of, or the middle of 2020.
I'm sure a lot has changed since then. We have a great anonymous comment here saying that it'd be great to see a Netflix documentary or series of videos to really dig deeper in some of these interviews and backstories.
There is a great Nike design series on YouTube that they've started since we started the book. Demetria can speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing. So we are starting to bring more of these stories out. And so, yeah, we have a design series that's on YouTube right now currently. We also have another group that's working on, it's a new group that's working on long form documentary style content as well. So we are going to start to give a little bit more under the hood and insights into these designs.
That's wonderful. So as a final parting thought, what do you hope that readers take away from the book when they read it?
My turn. I don't know. I mean, I guess hopefully to maybe learn a little something about what drives innovation and design at Nike. But also maybe just to get involved in sport, I think Nike, to me, it's the idea of making sport a daily habit. It's such a positive influence in people's lives, or can be. And I think that what's exciting about what Nike does is that you work with an athlete of the caliber of Eliud Kipchoge, who's able to break a 2-hour marathon, but that those innovations that are so highly targeted to the elite athlete end up trickling down to products that are at the outlet mall for my kids. And so I think that it's exciting that ultimately there's a positive spirit driving this stuff. And it's about well-being, personal well-being, and that sport is accessible to all, or that it should be accessible to all. And that's the inspiration behind these designs. And so I appreciate that message.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think for us on this side is that, exposing that innovation or our innovation agenda or journey as you kind of interact with our brand, it's coming from human curiosity, human passion, and a group of people that are just, obsessive about this. And so it's the emotional side of who we are as a team, as an organization that really gets poured into all those products, and athletes are our ultimate inspiration. And so if this can inspire someone else to go into these fields or to start sport or to, focus on how they can pivot their career to if you're an engineer and you want to get into shoe design, like all of those things, I think ultimately it's just, human passion and inspiration we want people to take away from it.
Well, thank you, Demetria. Thank you, Sam. It makes me want to go for a jog and read more about the book, more of the book. So Nike Better is Temporary. You can get it on Phaidon.com and use AIGA 2020 for 20% off this book and other books like Sam's other book, the Herman Miller book he was talking about. And then we'll be coming back next month, June 8th, for a talk about this book, How to Become a Successful Artist. And so thanks again for tuning in today, everybody. Sam and Demetria, thanks again so much.
Thank you.
And on behalf of Phaidon and AIGA, see you next time.
Thank you. Such a pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.